Police in Georgia have responded with force as protesters attempted to storm Parliament. It comes after a controversial law was passed that critics say could be used to threaten civil liberties. The Court of Appeal has ruled the sentence given to the man who killed 3 people in Nottingham last summer should stand. The Attorney General had asked judges to consider whether Valdo Calcane's indefinite hospital order was unduly lenient. And the woman in charge of weapons on the set of the film Rust is to appeal against her conviction for involuntary manslaughter. Anna Gutierrez-Reed was jailed for 18 months after a cinematographer was shot. Helena Hutchins died when a prop gun held by Alec Baldwin went off back in 2021. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 13 points at 84.28. The pound buys $1.25 and €1.16. LBC weather, rain easing for most tonight, but may continue in parts of Scotland and along the eastern coasts. A low of 8 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. This is Cross Question.
Very good evening. You're watching and listening to Cross Question with me, Ali Miraj, in for Ian Dale. It's just gone 1 minute past 8. I'm joined by an absolutely brilliant panel. This evening, I've got Stefan Boscia, author for Politico's London Playbook, on my left. Also being joined by Jessica Harrington, former Conservative MP and now family law barrister. To my right is Samuel Kasumu, who's a social entrepreneur, but also was an advisor to Boris Johnson. And Kirsten Oswald, SNP MP, is also on the panel this evening. You might want to ask about a number of things, including Sir Keir Starmer in for beer and sandwiches with union leaders, saying that he won't now back down on planned boost to workers' rights. Also, the country being too independent on immigration. We were just discussing that and the fact that the population is actually going to go down now of immigrants based on the new policies that the government's pursuing. And the prison's watchdog saying that criminals, including people who pose a risk to children, have been released from jail early or could be released from jail early. And don't forget to watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch on Global Player. This is LBC.
And let's go to our first question from Robert in Hastings, which is a text question. Does today's meeting between Starmer, we should say Sir Keir Starmer, and the union leaders show that they'll be running the show when Labour take over? Now, just a little bit of background for listeners and viewers. Keir Starmer, his deputy Angela Rayner, and the Labour Party chair Annalise Dodds have met with leaders of Labour's affiliated unions today over the reports that the party is going to water down its planned reforms to workers' rights. But in a joint statement, Labour and the unions say Labour has a full commitment to the plan. It was first agreed last summer when the unions say they were happy, and the unions say they are happy with the outcome of the meeting. Jessica Harrington, what do you make of this?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Robert, from Hastings, with the question. I mean, this is the tension. And the Labour Party have obviously spent the last year or so with Rachel Reeves and wining and dining in the city. Well, I think it's more breakfast meetings these days.
Salmon apparently. It's very popular.
And, and really trying to make the case that they can be trusted with the economy, but more importantly with business and their relationships with business. And actually, if that's really going to be the case, I think we're seeing here what we're really understanding is the rumblings, the tensions that are in the background. We've heard the headline from today, but the reality is it's going to be very difficult, I think, for Labour to the broad promises that they've made, 0 hours contracts and so on, and a timetable to implement them, to actually see that through. And I think the unions are going to want their say more and more, and it is going to be very difficult for Labour.
Do you think they're going to be in hock to the unions? Do you think the union barons are actually going to be not only in for beer and sandwiches, but actually pulling the strings like puppeteers?
I hope not. The real risk here is that if a number of those union leaders don't want the Labour Party, as in the Keir Starmer Labour Party, they want what they consider to be the Labour Party for the workers, then that is the worry. And I think that what's happened this week and what's happened today is something that we're all going to have to think about and reflect on.
Kirsten Oswald.
I think that's really interesting to hear, because I'm looking at this through a wholly different lens. I did hear Unite last week being very disappointed. They had a real disappointed mum, Joan, when they talked about the Labour Party and said that what was now being spoken of is not what was promised. So I think that Labour are in a slightly challenging situation here, because it feels a bit like they're shape-shifting. They're trying to be and say everything to everyone, and that's simply not possible. They need to decide who they are and what they're for, and that is not clear to me at the moment. This is one of the reasons why my party advocates so hard for employment rights to be devolved to Scotland, and then we feel we would be in a position where we could reliably have positive engagement with trade unions, have fair work, as the Scottish Government's worked very hard on the fair work agenda that is a key part of government there. I just think that these tensions which we've just heard about are becoming more and more obvious to all of us, and I do wonder, who are they and what are they for? That's not obvious.
Because what's wrong with union bosses going in, and a number of them went in today, and actually trying to push the envelope on the right to switch off, workers' right to switch off from their employers, a ban on zero-hours contracts, stronger employment rights from day one. I mean, what is wrong with that?
I'm not going to argue against any of these
You're from the
things.
SNP.
I would probably be arguing for more that rather than less of these things, because I think that there is a little bit of rowing back. That's certainly the mood music. That's how it feels, and it doesn't feel like a reliable direction of travel from Labour. So I would absolutely advocate for engagement with trade unions. People should be able to work in a safe and a secure job. They should be able to rely upon fair treatment in their work. We all work better in that kind of environment. We know that. But can we rely upon this being delivered? That's where I question things.
Now, Stefan, do you think that the meeting today just underlines the fact that union leaders will be effectively running the show if Labour come to power?
Absolutely not. I mean, this is not the 1970s. Organised labour in this country does not have the power it used to. Unions, compared to 40 years ago, are a much diminished force. And I think that this Labour Party under Starmer has shown that they really do want to be able to basically have enough say and enough sort of rope to put them to side when they need to, and also try and keep them on board just by the fact that the unions want a Labour government so badly. So, I mean, I think that today, Labour will be very happy with, because they can come out and say, we've acted in a way where we've collaborated with the unions, we haven't really given up anything. I'm sure that these talks will continue, but they have been able to stop the sniping from them, which is a great result for them.
But Stefan, there is going to be a point that comes very quickly after this supposedly inevitable victory that we're looking at the moment for Labour, and, it ain't done till it's done, but it looks that way. There is going to be a point where the rubber hits the road and Labour's going to have to make some choices to the point that Kirsten was just making there. And Mick Lynch and all these people are going to be asking for increased salaries going up and all the rest of it.
Absolutely. I mean, someone like Mick Lynch isn't even affiliated to Labour. I mean, his union isn't affiliated. He wasn't in the room today.
He's hardly a Tory, though, is he?
Quite right. But what I'm saying is, I think wait until we get past the election and see what they do. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at all, not to be too cynical, but if they take all the union money, they sort of, toe the line, and then they completely try to, wangle their way out of some of these things, because they do want a good relationship with business. And I was speaking to some very senior Labour people last night making the point that any reforms they try to do will only work if they have the cooperation of business, like they did with minimum wage in 97. And that's the only way these reforms will be implemented for the long term, whoever it is in government. So I think that it's more of a wait and see what happens after the election.
Samuel.
I think the reality is when you're in opposition, you can say whatever you feel people want to hear. And then the closer you get to the possibility of power, the more you realise that actually things are slightly more complicated than simply having plans that sound good when you're looking at what is practical. Mm-hmm. I think for Labour, it's very clear that they've spent time, particularly over the last few months, engaging productively with businesses. And I think those businesses have explained that we are in the middle of some exceptionally tough times for businesses large and small. Record numbers of of insolvencies and the like. And so actually adding to the burden for businesses could result in more businesses going bust. And actually it's better to have a good job than no job at all. And so some of that realisation, I think, is what's happening with Labour.
But Samuel, you say that it's better to have a job than no job at all. But do you also not think, and you've been advisor to Boris Johnson in the past, we won't hold that against you, but do you not think, Samuel, that capitalism is under strain at the moment, right? That people feel that it hasn't really worked the way it should. People are feeling disenfranchised. They're feeling left behind. There's generational inequality. People can't get on the housing ladder. They can't put a crust on the table. Things are tough out there. And the unions, a lot of people feel, have got their back.
Yeah, totally. We are experiencing some of the toughest times that we have for a generation. But the reality is businesses are also feeling that pinch. Not every business is an oil company who has benefited from the rise in oil prices over the last few years. There are many businesses in a really complicated, diverse economy that need the support of government and do not need extra burdens at this time. But there is a wider point around how parties are funded, right? Whether you are a wealthy donor or you're a trade union, there is no such thing as an altruistic donation. Like every one of those people who are giving money to political parties at some point are going to want to cash in, and how they cash in is through influence. And so for Keir Starmer, this is a really big challenge for him. Is he going to be able to be someone that stands up to them, both now and if he becomes Prime Minister?
Jessica?
Well, I just think the points that Samuel's highlighted about the position that we are, how delicate we are in terms of growth, in terms of the economy, that I'm sure there is good news, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about that. But whilst the pressures on young people, the housing ladder and so on, it is because of those tensions that the tightrope walk that Labour have to do this year between business, community and having their great relationships with the unions is under more pressure than it ever has been, in my view.
But Jessica, look, I speak to business leaders all the time. I even speak to US private equity bosses, right? And I tell you, when US private equity firms are telling you privately that they can do business with Keir Starmer, you've got to be worried as a Tory, haven't you?
Well, I mean, I as a Tory, I would be in that sense in terms of the election.
As a former Tory.
But as a former Tory, exactly, thank you. But in terms of the country and its standing, I think it's very important. I'd be very happy, not if Labour win, because I want the Conservatives, but if Labour win and we've got somebody, a Prime Minister, who has engaged well and has built up those relationships, as somebody who's always supported business, that has to be a positive for the country.
Stefan, I mean, how do you think Labour should balance this whole relationship with business and the unions on the one hand and the other? It looks like business, it looks like according to the reports, I think I may have read it in Politico London Playbook actually, that the tickets for the Labour business reception at their conference later this year sold out quicker than Taylor Swift's latest gig. I'm sure it is you, Stefan. But how are they going to balance this?
Well, I think that's a really important point, because I think that firstly, it shows that a lot of businesses are flocking to Labour, and they know where the electoral trends seem to be heading, or where people think that they're heading. And I think that, honestly, if we look at everything that this Labour Party under Keir Starmer has done, everything points to them having a very cosy, very pro-business relationship, I think, because they have time and time again said that they want to, increase growth more than anything. They have listened to them, and, if you look at a lot of their policies, they just rip off of the CBI and other think tanks.
I thought they were like Liz Truss, actually, some of the supply-side reforms on building on the Grey Belt. I mean, what do you make of that, Kirsten? I mean, do you actually think that they've taken a leaf out of the Liz Truss playbook?
I think it's increasingly difficult, as a completely impartial observer, to tell the difference, and I mean this quite sincerely, between Conservative policies and Labour policies at the moment. They are two sides of the one coin, and that, I think, is really challenging for those of us who don't advocate for that kind of politics, for these kind of policies.
But Labour's not offering tax cuts for workers. It's not offering a cut in national insurance. So there is some blue water now beginning. Sorry, I shouldn't say blue water. That's a colourist. I should say some water opening up between the two.
Well, I mean, let's see. I don't think that there is a great deal of space between the two of them at all. And, I think that's a deliberate positioning. And, think about the defection of Natalie Elphicke, for instance. That would have been unthinkable. Not so long ago. It was quite unthinkable to plenty of people in the chamber when it happened. You should have seen the expressions on faces on both sides. But I think it is indicative of where Labour are. They're somewhere different to where they have been in the past, and I think that's something that will be very uncomfortable for many.
Labour people would be very happy with that, because they've been losers in the past. I mean, if they're somewhere different, then they'd be very pleased, because it would mean they're on the way to victory, surely.
Well, we shall continue this in a moment. Make sure you get your calls in. This panel is waiting for your calls on 0345 6060 970. There's plenty to discuss. There's plenty going on. As I mentioned right at the beginning, we've just been talking about the workers' rights, but you might also want to touch on that immigration, the Migration Advisory Council talking about the student numbers going down and the fact that the government actually might be making some progress on getting the immigration numbers down. Is that a good or bad thing? And also the prisons watchdog saying that criminals, including people who could pose a risk to children, could have actually been released early from prison under this early release scheme because there's simply no place to put them. Get your calls in 0345 6060 973. Also text on 84850. Ask Alexa to send a comment to LBC. You're listening to and watching Cross Question with me, Ali Miraj, in for Ian Dale on LBC. It's 8:15.
This is LBC.
Claims.
Cross Question on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Ali Miraj in for Ian Dale on Cross Question. It's 8:17. And the next question is from Jennifer in Malvern. If the government isn't keen on lots of international students coming here to learn and prop up our universities with their higher tuition fees, do we need to increase the price which teens from this country are asked to pay instead? Now, this is just a little bit of background for you. If you are not across it, the Migration Advisory Committee has estimated that a ban on all foreign students apart from the ones studying for PhDs, well, a ban on all their dependents, we should say, apart from the ones studying PhDs, to bringing dependents to the UK, will lead to a total number of overseas students and dependents coming to the UK more than halving. The committee has warned that in the long term, it is not inconceivable that some institutions would fail and universities might go bust because of these new restrictions. The average international student pays £22,000 a year. Samuel.
Yeah, listen, total migration last year, about 1.2 million. Net migration, about 500,000-600,000. These numbers, by any stretch of the imagination, can be classified as mass migration. Now, are those numbers sustainable? Most people would argue they're not. And so the question is, how do you bring down the levels in a way that is sustainable? And I'm just happy that we can all finally agree that migration levels are a political choice. And so politicians make decisions that determine how many people come over here. And when it comes to international students, I think the challenge is, if you want to reduce those numbers or be less competitive on the global arena when it comes to attracting international students, then you have to find another way to fund universities or be very comfortable with universities doing less research or taking on or being a smaller industry within the UK.
But Samuel, you're saying, look, the net migration number was 750,000, whatever it was last year. If a huge chunk of that was foreign students coming for degrees of up to 3 years with dependents, and they could stay for an extra couple of years on work visas, what's the problem? They're going to basically go home after that, aren't they? Or are you concerned that they actually might just disappear into the system?
I personally am not concerned. I think that actually there are trade-offs, and on balance, I think the current system is probably the best that we could have, because if we don't have a system that attracts international students, then we need to find another way to fund universities. Now, compare us to Canada, for instance. If you go and study in Canada as an international student, you can stay for 3 additional years, and those 3 years contribute to the total amount of years you need to have indefinite leave to remain in Canada. And so we are not even the most competitive one right now. And so if we make ourselves less competitive when it comes to trying to attract international students, universities are going to have to find the money elsewhere. And the only other place to look are at domestic students who already are not happy paying 9,000 and so on, or the government's going to have to find a way to prop up the sector, or it will be less competitive when it comes to things like research.
Okay, Kirsten.
Well, obviously, things are different in Scotland, so I'm listening. I'm listening.
I was wondering how long it would take.
£9,000 a year for students. Where on earth are you meant to find that money?
It's a loan. It's fine.
It's fine. It's not fine. Students in Scotland don't pay for their tuition at university. University study is free.
Which effectively the rest of the UK is subsidising.
I don't think that's true. I think, go and look at the maths of it. But you talked about political choices, Samuel. That's a political choice that the Scottish Government has made. It's one that's deeply popular with students and their parents. And, I say this as the parent of 2 teenagers. It's a very attractive policy because we're investing in our young people. And, Samuel, again, has just talked about, making these choices. Where are you investing? I think that, in Scotland as well, the attitude, and there's been a poll out today that has covered some of this, the attitude to people coming to our country, people coming to work, is different. It's a positive in that poll. The attitude to students coming is a positive. These are seen as welcome developments, and I do think that there is a clear divide between the way that migration is talked about and the way that migration is perhaps perceived by people. And this polling today, I think, emphasises that. So it's not what I'm saying. This is what the findings of the poll say.
Don't you think that there's a danger that the positive elements of migration can come under scrutiny from people and actually can lose support when you have numbers in the volumes that we've been having? They're very difficult to integrate so many people as well. Yes, some may be coming on short-term reasons for studying and then go away and go back to their countries of origin. Others will stay. Do you not think that this is also needs to be managed quite carefully to bring people with?
Well, I don't think it's been managed carefully at all. I think that the way that the UK government approaches migration or approaches any kind of conversation about migration is hostile. It's challenging without looking at any of the nuance. You look at the difficulties that they're facing with this ridiculous Rwanda scheme. It's really an unhelpful
Seems to be working already. They're all going to Ireland.
I think it's a really unhelpful way to look at people who are fleeing from situations.
Well, it is if you're Michael Martin.
Well, I think look at the reasons why people are fleeing. Let's see if we can treat people in some kind of more appropriate manner, as we would perhaps wish to be treated ourselves. But I think the bigger picture, the narrative, the conversation, the language that is used around migration by the UK government is not helpful. It's not constructive. It's not designed to try and find a sensible way through any of this. And I would go back to that polling again. It seems to me that people in Scotland are looking a little bit more pragmatically at migration and looking at the contributions that people can make, valuable contributions to our country. We can use more people in Scotland, so people who are keen to come here and study and work are welcome, and will welcome the contributions.
Would you have any limits at all?
I think you probably have to work out what is sustainable, but I don't think that putting an arbitrary limit on some of the situations that we dealt with over the last few years would have worked. Look at Ukraine. Yeah. Look at how would that have worked? We need to find a better way to deal with this.
Stefan.
Yeah, I think back to the report and back to the larger point. I mean, yes. I think it's important to look at this in the context that a lot of people on the right of the Tory party, as a matter of policy, want smaller universities to close down because a lot of them think that they offer what they call low-value degrees and that too many people are studying them.
Is there some truth in that, Stefan, that they're a backdoor route to getting a work visa?
I think that the report today showed that some people use it that way, but overall it actually shows that people who come using a graduate visa and get jobs earn the same amount of money as graduates who were born here. And it actually shows that overall they have a positive net fiscal benefit to the country. So while there may be some people that do, on average, I don't think they do. But I think what I'm saying is the people in the Tory party who want to get rid of that visa, I do think it is a part of a broader plan because they want, less low value, as they call them, degrees.
Do you think that makes sense?
Look, I think that it's a very important part of the UK culture to have a strong academic sector, and I think that it's right now if people want to come here post-Brexit to study, to try to get a job, to contribute to the economy, that can only be a good thing, but it does need to be worked out.
Okay.
To make sure that people who do come on those routes, I think, actually do end up contributing to the economy.
Okay, Jessica.
Okay, there's quite a few points that have come out here. The first I'd say is I think I'm right in saying I was probably the only person who was an MP when, in fact, we brought in the tuition fee vote, and it's over 10 years ago now, it must be. But and all I'll say is that in terms of putting that forward as an option for one of the main political parties for this election, I think is unlikely, because I experienced at the time the very well drafted arguments on all sides of that debate, and our friends in the coalition on the Lib Dem side, we've all seen what happened to the decisions that they made around that vote. I mean, I supported it at the time as it happens, but in terms of the points about migration, there's a lot of points here. I genuinely, strongly and wholeheartedly believe we are absolutely stronger as a country, and we always have been, by having people move here and contribute to this country. There's just no question about
750,000 a year?
The figures, I know, and so what I'm coming on to saying is, but what we need to do, as always, is Kirsten, you were sort of saying we maybe need a limit, a cap. I think we need to be more specific. I'm saying that we need to make the best of people around the world. Please come here, bring your skills, come and work. We would love to see you come and study. There has to be, as ever with these systems, and this is what the difficulty has been, what are the channels around that to manage those numbers? How is that filtered? Because then what we have is a consequence if it's perceived to be unmanaged, and people are resentful about that.
Can I just come in and say, we don't let lots of people who come here work. So, what you're saying may be true and, may be correct in terms of the principles of it. But if we're not allowing people who come here to work, we're surely missing out on a huge number of skills.
But we were meant to be moving, according to Boris Johnson, to a high-skilled, high-wage economy. That was one of the mantras that he trotted out during Brexit. Now, do you think that it's wrong to actually increase the minimum salary threshold for a skilled worker from 26,200 to 38,700, and trying to bring in some of these measures to try and reduce the shortage occupation list to make it more narrow, so that we have fewer people actually coming in, Samuel?
Yeah, the shortage occupation list is very, very long, right? Firstly, and ultimately, when people migrate here who can do skilled work that people classify as low skilled, it does have a big impact on the overall wages and competitiveness. So certainly there's a need to look at that. But I think there's a broader point here. I don't think it's necessarily just about the numbers. It's about how you integrate people that come to Britain, and how you have a sense of identity that is shared and people know how to buy into that. I mean, we are a nation of immigrants. I'm not going to bore everybody. If you go back 2,000 years from the time of the Romans all the way to this moment, the reason why we've been so successful is because people have come and they've contributed and added value. So that's never going to go away, but it has to be done in a way that is manageable.
Well, it does. It does. Sorry, Jessica.
No, well, I was going to say, I absolutely agree with you. And then adding on what Kirsten also mentioned, Ukraine and people fleeing conflict and coming here. I'll declare an interest in terms of my, it happened to be my husband who brought in the Homes to Ukraine scheme. So I'll just make that clear declaration of interest. But my point is, there you had a particular scenario where all the government departments were able to work together to come up with a programme where there were English language lessons, where there was a package of support. It has to be right that can't just be rolled out for any person. And I think we need to focus very much on the different categories. Somebody fleeing conflict, of course, and seeking a home here is very different.
It should be temporary. That was the expectation.
Exactly.
But we do also have structural shortages in certain areas, particularly the care system. We've got 152,000 vacancies at the moment. I mean, Stefan, how on earth do we fill these if we don't get people in? Unless you're prepared, unless people here are prepared to step up. And the argument always is given that, well, you pay them more and they'll come. But it hasn't happened.
Yeah, and you're talking about care workers. I mean, I think very few would reach those £38,000 cap that you're talking about when there's already a shortage that's likely going to exacerbate it just by the pure economics of it. I think that we have massive skills gaps. We have massive skills gaps in so many areas in this country that needs to be calibrated a bit better so we actually make sure we get people in who fill those instead of just...
But we're not going to have people sitting in Whitehall like a command and control economy, are we? Saying, oh, yes, let's look at all the professions out there and we're going to centrally control this from Whitehall. I mean, it can't work.
I don't forget we have an ageing population.
Well, we do.
And we're having less children.
Yes, we are.
And so, let us be honest about the fact that immigration will play a significant role in trying to help us to maintain ourselves, our competitiveness as an economy. But it has to be done in a manageable, intentional way. No need for all the dodgy rhetoric. Let's just focus on the facts and make sure we're doing the right thing.
No need for dodgy rhetoric, certainly not on this programme. You heard it from Samuel. Get your calls in. You're being rather shy this evening with your calls. We're getting some great text questions in. Do pick up the phone, 03456060973. You can also text on 84850. Ask Alexa to send a comment to us. Alexa's never short of a question. You can always be sure of that. You're listening to and watching Cross Question with me, Ali Miraj, in for Ian Dale on LBC at 8:30. The news headlines with Daryl Jackson.
2 prison officers have been killed and 3 others have been injured following an ambush on a convoy in France. The van transporting an inmate to a court hearing was attacked near Rouen. 2 men accused of planning to carry out a gun attack against the Jewish community have appeared in court. They've been charged with preparing acts of terrorism in the northwest of England between December last year and last Thursday. And Manchester's Co-op Live has finally opened its doors after weeks of delays at the UK's biggest arena. A series of shows have been cancelled at short notice, but Elbow are due to become the first band to headline there tonight. LBC weather, rain easing for most tonight, but may continue in parts of Scotland and along eastern coasts of England, and a low of 8 degrees.
This is LBC.
Apply.
Cross Question on LBC. Text 84850.
Ali Miraj on LBC. In for Ian Dale, it's Cross Question. It's 8:34, and I'm joined by a really stellar panel this evening. Stefan Boscia, to my left, author of Politico's London Playbook. Stefan, Politico's London Playbook is this very long email, which is as essential to my day. It can be a bit long at sometimes, but I thoroughly enjoy it. As essential to my daily routine as porridge. Actually, I didn't mean porridge. I meant a croissant, but we're going to touch on obesity later, so I thought I'd try and get some brownie points. How's it going there? And also, you originally studied in Melbourne. How are we doing compared to Melbourne, particularly weather-wise?
Done your research. I think the weekend was the first time this year that it's been warmer in London than Melbourne, even though it's almost winter there. So we're not doing well in that sense. And, in terms of Politico Playbook, we're going from strength to strength. 100,000 plus subscribers. We're growing our newsroom very quickly. We've doubled our headcount at Politico in London over the last year. So I'm very, very happy there. And everyone, please do subscribe.
It's great. It's very good. It is essential reading. And I'm glad that you're enjoying the weather here. Now, Jessica Harrington is also joining me on my left, a former Conservative MP for Erewash and a family law barrister. Jessica, why did you decide to leave Parliament after just one term? Did you have enough?
Well, you can never have enough of politics, but for me, it was a very finely balanced decision. I love being an MP, but I love being I love the law, and I love being a barrister just a little bit more. So it was definitely an on-balance decision. It's a very difficult decision. Took me about a year to decide. At the time, it's a long time ago, I was relatively young to go into politics.
Young now.
Thank you. But I just thought that I'd rather press on with my law career and then maybe return to public service, not necessarily as an MP at all, but contribute maybe in later life. That was the better. That was the better balance for me.
You're still working in a form of public service now with the work you're doing in the bar.
Yeah, so I do family law. So I do have a private practice, but I do a lot of legal aid, child protection work.
And you're also involved in the Children's Society as well.
Yes, that's right. I've been a trustee.
Why is that important to you?
Oh, it's very important. I mean, I think we're very lucky with our Children's Society and other charities representing and working with children. I've been able to see it both from the political side with the very constructive research and lobbying that those groups do, but also the practical work that they offer to children. Many of them, vulnerable children, often have been in foster care and difficulties. And I do think genuinely our main children's charities and the smaller ones are wonderful.
Hugely important. Also joining me to my right is Samuel Kasumu. He's a social entrepreneur, also a former advisor to Boris Johnson. Samuel, you've also written a really interesting book, which I thoroughly enjoyed reading, The Power of the Outsider. What was it about?
So essentially, when I was in Downing Street, I was for a long time the only black advisor, but also someone didn't go to Oxford and Cambridge, wasn't part of the very elite set, didn't work for Boris when he was at City Hall. So I was very much an outsider. But there was no time to think about that because I was in a place like Downing Street and a lot was happening, right, during the pandemic, etc. So when I left, I wanted to kind of craft the blueprint for other people that might feel like outsiders when they enter spaces where they're the only or one of few.
Yeah, and what are you doing now?
I've been on a book tour. The book came out in June. I've been winding down my time as a counsellor, which ended last Thursday. I have 2 kids who keep me very busy, and I run a business on the side as well.
Very good, excellent. And Kirsten Oswald, SNP MP and Women and Equality spokesperson for the party. Very good to have you as well, Kirsten. Before you entered politics, you were in human resources for a period of years. How important do you think it is for politicians to have had a real job?
Do you know what? I think it's about the mix. So if we all followed the same path, then you would have a whole bunch of identikit politicians, and I don't think that would be particularly healthy. So my experience working was very useful to me. I entered politics much later in life than many people do, and it was not something which had been predicted by me or anyone else until shortly before it happened. But it's an important thing, I think, that people do have something to bring with them. Sure. It may be work experience, it may be academic experience, it may be something else in their life. It could be to do with their family. So I think everybody has something to bring. I think for me, though, it is that really important point that we're not all the same. Everyone has their own thoughts and opinions. Yes. Everyone will have their own hinterland to bring.
Absolutely, hinterland, very important. Now, Mary in Frinton-on-Sea, beautiful part of the world, in Essex, is on the line. Very good evening to you. Mary, what would you like to ask?
Hello, I'm a care worker and I'd like to know what the panel thinks. I get £11.55 an hour and I work a Sunday evening and I get no extra pay.
Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Let me just give a bit of background here. As part of the crackdown on net migration, which we discussed before the news, new restrictions on overseas care workers came into force a month ago. They now must earn at least £23,200 a year and can no longer bring their partner or children to Britain with them on their visa. Now, you're hearing what Mary's just said there. Samuel, what do you make of this?
Having no extra pay.
Having no extra pay and also just being paid £11.55 an hour. I mean, we've got 150,000 care worker vacancies. Yeah. How do we deal with this?
Yeah, it's a challenge. As you know, I was a district councillor until last Thursday, and a lot of social care is funded directly through local councils who are struggling. 69% reduction in their budgets since 2010, etc., etc. You can actually earn more money stacking shelves in Tesco's.
Well, that's what a lot of people do.
Exactly. Than being a care worker. There are no easy fixes. The challenge is politicians are not very brave or courageous when it comes to trying to fix our health and social care system. We're going to have to find more money from somewhere, and so that therefore I guess I don't think it's going to happen. But what we need to see in the next election and in manifestos is a clear offer about how you deal with this crisis. But honestly, I hate to say it, but I don't think a solution is going to come from Labour or the Conservatives in the short to medium term.
Kirsten, you're Women's and Equalities spokesperson for the SNP. A lot of people who working in care, not exclusively, a huge number are women working on very low wages. What do we do to address this?
And that's actually a really important point, because in a lot of cases, not only this particular line of work, people who are in less secure employment, in employment which pays less well, are very often women. Quite regularly women with caring responsibilities, women who have to juggle their job with childcare. It's a really hard shift. So, I guess the key things are maybe having that conversation about why have we got all these vacancies, and why have we got all these vacancies when we will not allow people to come into the country who are skilled and qualified to fill these vacancies.
A lot of people went away. More? Isn't the answer to pay more to get domestic people more involved?
Let me get to that.
Yeah.
So, I think that this is a sum of lots of different parts, actually. It's not a giant amount of money, is it? £11.55 an hour. I hate to say this, but it's true. If she was in Scotland, she would be paid more. That's a reality. That's a fact. I'm not going to suggest to anybody that she would be paid huge sums of money for the work that she's doing. It's really important work, though. So that's the other thing that we need to recognise. Yep. This is really important work. We've heard already the very valid point that we have an ageing population. We're expecting people to do this difficult job, and a really important job. These are our loved ones who are being cared for, and we're not willing to do the difficult things of having the conversation about who can do these jobs, who can work, do we have enough people here to do it? Obviously not. And how much should people be paid?
Jessica, just to the point that Kirsten just made there, it's a hugely important job. And part of the reason why we have these care workers is because a lot of them are working in domestic care to try and keep people in their own homes with washing and feeding and other things, basic domestic stuff that needs to be done. It's a hugely important role. We simply don't have the resources to put everyone in care homes, nor should we. What do we do to address the kind of issues that Mary's facing working on £11.55 an hour?
I absolutely, I'm very sympathetic to Mary's situation, and the reason is that in my household, when I was growing up, my mum was the main breadwinner. She was a paediatric nurse, a sister, and she chose to work nights to, get a little bit more to try and keep the family in the best possible situation. So I've been brought up in that environment of somebody, and I also would say to Mary, I'm aware it's not just the hours on your feet, it's the physical demands of the job, as well as the emotional resource that you have to employ every day, because it's in your nature to want to care. That's why you're doing the job that you're doing. So that I'm very sympathetic about. What's needed here is a complete turnaround in how we value. It's actually similar to what Kirsten said, but what jobs we value and why we value them. I know that can't be done overnight. I'm not naive about that. But I think in terms of when you look at schools, if you look at education, you need to make people aware of the range of jobs that they can do. And if that can be coupled with, I would say, more teaching and respect, and therefore demands then for pay would follow in terms of the caring and the nursing sector, I think that would go a long way.
What you're calling is for a cultural shift.
I am, because as I say, I grew up, I lived in that environment, and I know how hard my mother worked.
Yes.
And I therefore respect people that do any of those. That she was a paediatric nurse, but any jobs within that sector, and it is difficult. So it is a cultural shift. I think we need that. Won't happen overnight, but that's what I think is needed.
Stefan, we're all talking about a high-skill, high-wage economy. That's all very well, but you do need people to do essential services like this to actually enable people to get on with their lives. We've got an ageing population. This is going to become an increasingly structural problem for us. How do we deal with this?
Look, I'm not going to come here and say I have an answer to that, and I don't think our politicians do either.
No one does.
If they did, something would have happened. Boris Johnson said at the steps, well, there are only steps number 10, but at the front of number 10, that this would be something he dealt with, and he said that in his first speech as PM. Nothing's happened since. Yeah. And I think that it's the key problem is a question of priorities.
I think we do know what needs to be done, but the political will to do that is just not there.
Are we talking about increasing the minimum wage for care workers? Is that what we're talking about?
You've got to pay care workers more, but you have to find the money.
Okay. That is what has started to happen in Scotland. So, it is about how we value people. That, I'm sure there's probably not enough money at all to pay people who do what are these really difficult jobs. They're also increasingly highly qualified people who work in these jobs as well.
Absolutely.
And again, are we collectively respecting that? I'm not sure we are, but we certainly should.
Mary, quick comment from you before I let you go. You've heard the panel's thoughts. No one has a complete answer for you, but it's certainly an issue that everyone's grappling with. What are your thoughts as someone on the front line, Mary?
Yes, first of all, I think your programme is very interesting. I really enjoy it. It's fascinating. But it would be nice to be paid extra money for working on a Sunday. And also, if you're going to 3 clients in one day, the travelling time from one client to the other, you don't get paid. And
you also have to pay for your travel and your parking fees and all the rest of it.
Yes. And
years
years ago, when I worked for social services, we used to get paid travelling time. Even if it took you 5 minutes, 10 minutes or half an hour to get to the next client, we got paid.
Mary, thank you very much. I think it's an important point because it is all time and people are not getting paid much money at all to do a very difficult job in difficult circumstances, and it's hugely important. And as someone in my own family who is reliant on carers, I meet carers practically on a daily basis, so I know exactly the work that's involved. And I thank you very much, Mary, for your contribution and support, and we all need to value it a lot more. You're listening to and watching Cross Question with Ali Miraj, in for Ian Dale on LBC. It's 8:46.
This is LBC.
leaders.
Cross Question on LBC.
Ali Miraj on LBC, in for Ian Dale, 8:49. It's Cross Question on LBC. Just before we continue the questions, Kirsten, you are working on a campaign to abolish promotion of vapes on sports vests and other things, sporting equipment that people use.
That's right. So at the moment, you quite correctly can't advertise cigarettes or tobacco on the front of a sports strip, but you can advertise vapes or vape companies.
Right.
Now, I think that's wrong. You know, it's just nonsense. The tobacco and vapes bill that's going through Parliament at the moment is doing lots of really good things to prevent smoking, to stop the harms caused by smoking, and also to deal with the increasing problem of young people vaping. And this is what this is all about.
Usually.
Young people who've never smoked are vaping. It's not a smoking cessation issue then. We need to do everything we can to stop it. And part of that is the very influential sports teams taking a grip of the situation and stopping doing this.
Well, very best of luck with that. A very important campaign indeed. Now, Perry in Barnet has got a question here. Isn't it a sad reflection on our society that so many people are trying to get injections to lose weight? What happened to going for a run or just eating a bit less pudding? And just for background, I'm not sure, actually, I've taken this a bit personally, actually, because I did have a packet of crisps before I came on. A new study run by University College London has shown that weekly injections of the hugely popular diabetes drug Ozempic could cut the risks of heart attacks and strokes among people who aren't diabetic, as well as helping them to lose weight. Is it a sad reflection on our society that people can't just go for a run or eat less pudding? Stefan?
No, the ends justify the means. I mean, who gives a toss how people do it? If they want to get injections, they should get injections up to the hilt. And, you know, if it works and if it helps people become healthier, if it reduces heart disease, if it reduces cancer, honestly, I mean, I couldn't care less how people do it. And as well, there's good economic effects. So Ozempic is single-handedly responsible for Denmark having economic growth this year. It is a massive success for that country.
Every cloud has a silver lining, Jessica.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in agreement, Stefan. I mean, I think that, look, for time immemorial, people have tried to tackle their weight. I mean, it's not that long ago when women were like locking themselves into these corsets. They were desperate. I mean, I think that, I mean, for somebody I've always struggled in my weight. I love food. I have breakfast and not start looking forward to what's for lunch. And people that say, "Oh, I never think about food. I forgot to eat today." I mean, I'm just not in that zone. So I do have to watch. It. And on medical advice, if I was told to do something along the lines that's been set out, then I would. I mean, and I'm with Stefan. The ends justify.
Do you not think, Samuel, that there is a personal responsibility element here, and we can get too addicted to drugs all the time to solve our issues rather than taking a bit more personal responsibility?
Totally. You mentioned Denmark's economy, but the reality is there is not enough supply for existing demand. So this idea that more people can have access to this drug in the short to medium term is for the birds. And actually what I think we need is to return to what we were working on in Downing Street, which is a really clear strategy, a plan for how we're going to encourage people to be more healthier overall. I'm probably maybe one of few in the room that feels very uneasy about
the one with Henry Dimbleby that got nowhere. That one. Sorry, Sam. Sorry. I come on, it's okay.
Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, in terms of being optimistic and maybe not just all relying on injections and so on, and surgery. I would. To me, there is quite a culture shift, in a generational shift. So what I mean by that is, any sort of young person I know or a student now, that part of their absolute routine is going to the gym and getting exercise. When I was at university back in the mid to late 90s, I mean, unless you were in the sports team and you were a sporty type, I mean, I must say my trips to the gym or the tennis court were, well, shall we say, you could probably count them on one hand. I'm not proud about that, but there's definitely a cultural shift. It seems to be absolutely young people are focused on exercise. That's a positive.
Sorry, Stefan.
I was going to say, absolutely, it's because of social media. They're all on Instagram, they're all on TikTok. Their priorities are so different. I mean, I'm only 31, but I mean, even Gen Z's generation below, completely different kettle of fish.
But obesity is a huge problem for the NHS. It's a massive challenge. Kirsten, what do we do?
I think that's where I wanted to come in. You know, these things would obviously only be given out on medical advice. Well, exactly. People aren't going to go to the corner shop and buy them. So, you know, if this is what the doctors are prescribing, then, you know, perhaps it's worth looking at that as one of a range of things to be done. And if we have the opportunity to do that and we don't, then presumably we're accepting that the NHS is going to have to deal with the people who have not made use of this treatment. So there's a good economic argument for the NHS as well.
Do you think, Kirsten, that there's a danger here with looking at Ozempic as like a golden pot at the end of the rainbow, the universal panacea? It's got to be part of
I mean, that's what I said. It has to be a range of different things. So, there's lots of other things. It's Mental Health Week this week. One of the themes of Mental Health Week seems to be getting people moving, getting folk moving around, and the sort of the physical being good for the mental well-being. So, it does need to be part of a package of things, but we definitely shouldn't just rule it out. That would be bonkers.
Just remember, there isn't enough to go around. So we still have to focus on all the other things that are important for us to be a healthier nation.
Absolutely. Now, this is a very important question that's come in from Sarah via WhatsApp. Is the House of Commons a safe place to work? Now, just by way of background, a vote last night to make it the rule to suspend MPs from the House of Commons from the point of arrest for a serious offence rather than when they are charged was passed by just one vote. I think Natalie Elphick may have helped with that. Not the most popular person at the moment, but anyway. Receiving the support of 8 Tory rebels, including Theresa May and Safeguarding Minister Laura Farris. But Conservative MP Miriam Cates later wrote, "Watch the vexatious complaints roll in." Now, this is really important. Jessica, you've been in Parliament. What is your view on this?
Yeah, I have been in Parliament, and I've also worked in my role as a family barrister for over 20 years with victims and perpetrators of domestic abuse. I've thought about this scenario very carefully. I thought this question may come up, and I think for me it's very finely balanced. If I was in the House last night, I would have very much grappled with how to vote. And whilst I absolutely see the arguments in terms of banning effectively people from the moment there's an investigation and so on, only for very serious, let's be clear, it's for violent and sexual offences, very serious matters. For me, what trumps that, though, is, as a lawyer, I think about the rule of law and about when is that time. And for me, the point is at charge, because once the CPS, the state, if you like, have reviewed and made a decision that this is a matter that needs to go to a criminal court, there's no question after that time somebody shouldn't be there. But that, to me, is the point that decision should be made. I think you can make all your requests you like for people to stay away from work, and I don't quite agree with Miriam Cates' comment about there'll be a whole big raft of vexatious. I don't think that's particularly helpful. But what I do say is that the point is at charge. I think that is that reflects, I think, where we should be as a society.
Kirsten, you've been in Parliament since 2015. You had a brief, let's put it, sojourn for a couple of years, but you decided
my gap years.
Your gap years. You had a couple of gap years, but you came back in 2019 again. Is Parliament a safe place to work?
I'm not sure it's any. Is it more or less safe than when I began?
Well, we've had a lot of complaints.
In these terms, I don't know, but I think this is the thing. There have been lots of issues to be dealt with, and these are really serious things. I was at an event earlier on, and I heard that I think there are 10,000 pass holders in the House of Commons, and obviously we have all these hundreds of MPs. So, there's a big responsibility in terms of the welfare of the people who work there. And I think that, I hear the arguments about it, maybe not being quite the right decision from Rachel's point of view, but I think it probably was the right decision. I think it's sensible. I think it's reasonably pragmatic. It is always going to be difficult because of the nature and the size of the workplace. But clearly things are challenging. So let's try and do something else to try and improve the situation.
Samuel, you've been in and out of there all the time. What's your view?
Yeah, I worked from my early 20s. I worked in the House of Commons as well. I think it's a place where we have a lot of powerful people, but also a lot of young, ambitious people, and often probably more alcohol than is probably ideal. And late
people away from home.
And people away from home. And so it's a concoction of variables that means that you have to be more careful. And actually, if somebody is accused of something and they're a very powerful individual, it probably isn't wise for them to be in the environment where the person that they perhaps are accused of doing anything to assault and etc. is still in there. I think the balance should be, well, can they still function as parliamentarians?
Yes.
And by that I mean things like, are they able to vote by proxy, etc. And I don't know the details.
I see.
But these are some
not
of the things
physically be there while they're being investigated.
Stefan.
And I think to follow on from that point as well, I mean, if someone is arrested without being charged, if they're banned from Parliament, I mean, how can they not be tarred with the brush of being a sex pest before they've even been charged?
Well, that is the danger, isn't it?
I mean,
that is the danger.
Absolutely, because it will be found out very quickly. Everyone will know because they're being excluded from Parliament. And I think that there is a danger if that person is innocent.
And it has happened. Yeah, it has happened to MPs where this has exactly happened. Fascinating discussion, not an easy one. Time for the fun question, which, don't panic, it's all right. This one. Who else? This is from Michelle in Newbury. Who else should be immortalised in an 8-foot-long painting? The first official portrait of the king has been unveiled at Buckingham Palace today. It is 8.5 foot long, showing him in the uniform of the Welsh Guards Regiment of the Army. I think wasn't there a butterfly involved in this as well? I think there was. Stefan.
If England wins the Euros, Gareth Southgate.
That's a good one. Jessica.
That is a good one. Well, the person I've always admired in history and so on is Elizabeth I, but there's already plenty of portraits of her, 8 foot and longer, so I'll go for a personal one. Sorry. I'll go for our very excellent dog Moodles. He's small, though. How's he going to fit the 8 foot? How are we going to get to 10 foot?
Samuel.
Unfortunately, another football answer for me. It's going to have to be Jurgen Klopp. I'm a Liverpool fan. This weekend is going to be very emotional for me.
He probably deserves one, to be fair, after all the stuff he's done. Kirsten.
I'm liking all the football talk, and I think it would be a refreshing change, frankly, to have footballers rather than the kind of people we normally see on statues and in all these fancy pictures. I'm not really bothered who it is, but maybe if it could be a woman instead of a man for a change, that would be a welcome development.
Here. I agree to that. What a fantastic discussion we've had. Thank you very much indeed to Stefan Boscia, Jessica Harrington, also to Samuel Kasumu and Kirsten Oswald. Thank you very much indeed for joining me this evening. Coming up, well, this is really, really interesting because there's an all-party parliamentary group entitled the Beyond Pills All-Party Parliamentary Group. What? It's released Beyond Pills. Yeah, don't get too excited. It's released a report entitled Shifting the Balance Towards Social Interventions, a call for the overhaul of the mental health system. What it's basically saying is that we should not be prescribing pills to everyone who's got mental health issues, but it should be looked at in a much more holistic,